The old police station loomed at the far end of Main Street, a shadow from another time. Its windows were cracked like fractured memories. The once white bricks now stained with decades of rain and secrets. For years people in town had walked past, without a second glance, as if pretending it wasn't there would make it disappear. Officer Daniel Cole stood at the rusted front doors, his gloved hand on the lock. The cold morning air clung to him. Biting at his skin beside him sat Rex, his loyal German Shepherd partner, sitting tall but alert, amber eyes scanning the streets. It had been over 5 years since Daniel last stepped inside this building. That was the day both he and Rex were retired. Daniel for a back injury that never healed. Right, and Rex for age and wounds only a working canine would understand. They had both been forced out, quietly handed plaques and polite thank yous before being sent into the quiet life. Now the city had decided to tear the place down. Daniel wasn't here for nostalgia, just to grab a few personal items from his old locker before demolition crews moved in. But the moment the heavy door creaked open, something shifted. The air inside was colder than outside, stale and unmoving. The light from the street bled in through the broken windows, catching on floating dust motes that swirled like slow snow. Every footstep echoed as if the building itself was listening. X moved ahead, sniffing the air with a focus Daniel recognized, not just casual curiosity. This was work mode. Easy boy, Daniel murmured, shutting the door behind them. The sound of the latch falling into place felt final, like they had just sealed themselves inside. The station was exactly as Daniel remembered, only smaller. Somehow, hallways that once bustled with uniforms and chatter were now lined with peeling paint and silence. He passed the duty desk, the empty evidence lockers, the bulletin boards still pinned with curling papers. Yellowed by time, they were halfway to his old locker room when Rex stopped dead in the main hall. His ears pricked, his body stiffened, and his nose went to the ground. "What is it?" Daniel asked, slowing his pace. Rex sniffed once, twice, then started pawing at the floorboards. At first, Daniel chuckled, "We're not looking for suspects anymore, buddy." But Rex didn't stop. He dug harder, his claws scraping the wood with sharp, quick strokes. Shavings of splintered timber scattered under his paws. His breathing quickened, chest rising and falling with a strange urgency. "Rex, hey!" Daniel stepped closer. "What are you?" The sound stopped him, not the scratching, but something beneath it. A deep, dull thunk, faint but unmistakable. Daniel frowned. He crouched down and pressed his palm to the spot Rex was attacking. Hollow, definitely hollow. A ripple of unease moved through him. He glanced at the walls, the high ceiling, the long hallway stretching behind them. This floor had been here for decades. He'd walked across it hundreds of times without ever hearing that sound. "All right, partner," Daniel murmured, his voice low. "Now, let's see what's got your attention." He pulled a small multi-tool from his pocket, flipping out the flat edge. Rex stepped back just far enough to let Daniel wedge the blade between the planks and pry upward. The wood resisted, groaning softly, before splitting with a sharp crack. When it happened, a rush of cold air poured out from the gap like an exhale from somewhere deep below. It carried with it a smell that made Daniel's stomach twist, not just musty, but damp, earthy, and faintly metallic. Rex growled low in his throat, staring into the dark hole they'd opened. His hackles were raised. Daniel leaned closer, his flashlight cutting through the shadow. But all he could see was black. This wasn't in any blueprint I ever saw, he whispered to himself. He remembered the stories, half-jokes told in the break room about the dungeon beneath the station. Some said it was just a storage cellar, others swore it was something else, something they weren't supposed to talk. But Daniel swallowed hard. He'd always laughed those stories off, but now he wasn't so sure. He sat back on his heels, eyes fixed on the gap in the floor. His mind ran through possibilities: an old crawlspace, a forgotten holding cell from decades ago, maybe even smuggler tunnels from the town's prohibition days. But none of those explanations would make Rex act like this. Rex took a step forward, his nose dipping to the opening. Sniffing hard, he whimpered once, almost impatiently, then looked up at Daniel as if to say, "We're not leaving until we see what's down there." Daniel's gut told him he shouldn't be doing this alone. Whatever was under this floor had been hidden for a reason, and he wasn't sure he wanted to find out why. He took a deep breath, trying to shake the tension in his shoulders. "All right," he said quietly, "but we take it slow." His flashlight beam caught the edges of the opening, revealing rusty metal beneath the wood, not just floor supports, something else. It looked like the lid of a hatch. Daniel's pulse kicked up. He wedged his tool into the gap again, prying until the wood splintered further, widening the hole with a heavy creak. A square section of floor came loose, exposing the hatch fully. It was old iron, corroded, with a circular handle at the center. Around the edges, the floorboards were marked with faint carvings, nearly lost to time. Daniel brushed the dust away with his sleeve and froze initials, dates, and one word scratched and jagged. Desperate strokes. HLP. The letters were uneven, like someone had carved them in a hurry. Or in fear. X's growl deepened. Daniel His throat went dry. He looked at the hatch again. The iron handle dull with rust. He imagined the hands that had gripped it last, the voices that might have echoed in the darkness below. The air seemed heavier now, pressing in from all sides. He knew one thing for sure. This was no storage space. Whatever was under this floor, it wasn't meant to be found, but it was too late. Rex had found it. Daniel stood, his hand still resting on the hatch. "All right, boy," he murmured. "Tomorrow we come back with the right tools." As they stepped out into the fading afternoon light, the station seemed to watch them leave. Daniel locked the door behind him, the metal key cold in his palm. He didn't know it yet, but this was the first step into something much bigger that would rip open the town's oldest secrets. And if you think you know where this is going, trust me, you don't stay with me until the end, because what Rex uncovered here didn't just change my life, it shook the entire town to its core. Daniel barely slept that night. He sat at his kitchen table long after midnight, nursing a cup of coffee, gone cold. Rex curled up at his feet every time Daniel closed his eyes. He saw the hatch under the floor of the old police station, the rust, the carvings. The word help burned into the wood like a cry frozen in time. It wasn't the kind of thing you could just ignore. The city had given him only a couple of days before demolition started. If he didn't go back now, the secret under that floor might be lost forever, swallowed by rubble, buried in concrete, and erased from memory by sunrise. Daniel had made up his mind. He loaded his truck with a crowbar, a flashlight rope, and an old respirator mask, half for dust, half for whatever was giving that space its foul metallic smell. Rex hopped into the passenger seat without being told. The dog seemed to sense they had unfinished business. The town was still waking when they pulled up to the station. Mist clung to the ground, and the building looked even more lifeless than it had the day before. Daniel unlocked the door, the sound echoing down the empty hallways and sighed. The air was as cold and still as before, but today, Daniel didn't wander. He headed straight for the main hall. Rex trotted ahead, nose to the floor, and made a beeline for the same spot. He didn't waste a second before pawing at it again. Almost frantic, Daniel crouched, pressing his hand to the boards. He could feel the faint vibration of Rex's claws against the hollow space beneath. "All right, boy," Daniel murmured. "Let's open this thing up." The crowbar bit into the wood, and with each pull more splinters broke free. Daniel worked quickly but carefully, widening yesterday's hole until the full hatch was visibly up close. It looked worse, rust eaten deep into the iron, the circular handle stiff with age. Daniel gripped it and pulled at first. Nothing happened. The hatch didn't budge. He braced himself, gritted his teeth, and yanked again. This time the metal screeched, protesting after decades of silence, before finally shifting. A blast of icy stale air rushed upward, hitting him in the face. Even through the respirator, the smell seeped in damp stone mold and something older, something that made his stomach clench. The flashlight beam cut into the darkness below, revealing narrow stone steps descending into blackness. Rex stood at the edge, peering down his body. Tense. Daniel hesitated. Every instinct told him to wait, to call someone, to have backup, but deep down, he knew what would happen if he did. The wrong people might get there first, and if what was down there had been hidden for this long, maybe it had been hidden by the very people who were supposed to protect the town. He clipped the flashlight to his jacket, looped the rope around a nearby beam, just in case, and started down the steps. Rex followed without a sound, each paw landing on the stone with careful precision. The temperature dropped sharply as they descended. Daniel's breath came in white clouds, the sound of dripping water echoing from somewhere unseen. The beam of light swung over rough stone walls, old enough that the mortar between the blocks was crumbling. At the bottom, the steps opened into a small chamber. Daniel froze. Rings were bolted into the walls, 4 of them, each holding the remains of thick rusted chains. Against one wall sat a rotting wooden bench, splintered and warped from damp. The floor was covered in dirt, but here and there, small shapes jutted out: tin cups, a boot without a sole, and scraps of fabric so faded they were barely recognizable as clothing. Rex sniffed along the wall, his nose pulling him toward the far corner. He barked once, sharp and urgent, then started scratching at the stone. Daniel swung the flashlight in that direction. One of the large blocks had shifted slightly out of place, leaving a narrow gap. Something glinted inside. He knelt, using the crowbar to pry the block loose. It took effort, but finally, the stone scraped forward, enough to reveal a small tin box wedged inside the wall. Daniel pulled it free. The metal was cold, the lid corroded at the edges. He forced it open, and a small stack of folded papers slid into his hand. They were letters, handwritten, smudged, the ink faded but still legible. "Please, if anyone finds this, tell my family I didn't run away. We've been down here for weeks. No one comes except at night. They told us no one would believe us anyway." Daniel's chest tightened as he read. These weren't just random notes, they were confessions, pleas for help, and the dates scrawled at the top matched names he remembered from old missing persons case. This case has gone cold decades ago. He stuffed the letters back into the box, his mind racing. Whoever had built this chamber hadn't just been hiding something, they'd been hiding people. Rex growled, pulling Daniel's attention back to the steps. A sound of faint movement echoed from above. A soft creak, then another. Someone was walking across the main hall. Daniel quickly switched off the flashlight, plunging the chamber into darkness. He could feel Rex's muscles tense beside him. For a long moment there was only silence, then the footsteps faded away. Daniel let out a slow breath. Whoever it was, they hadn't come down, but now he knew he wasn't the only one who knew about this place. The walls seemed to close in as he climbed back up the steps, Rex staying at his side. When they emerged into the main hall, the air felt different, warmer but heavier, as if the building itself knew they'd just seen something it had tried to keep hidden. Daniel closed the hatch, but his hands were shaking. He slid the floorboards back into place as best he could, hoping it wouldn't draw attention back in the truck. Rex curled up, but kept his eyes on the station's front door. Daniel sat behind the wheel, staring at the building. The old rumors about the station, the missing cases, the strange gaps in the old police logs, they weren't just gossip. This was Rayland. Now he had proof, but proof was dangerous. If the wrong people found out what he had, there was no telling what they might do to keep the truth. Paradise, they drove away. Daniel glanced at Rex the dog's ears, where perked his gaze fixed on the road ahead. "All right, partner," Daniel murmured, "looks like we just stepped into something big. And I don't think either of us is ready for what's coming next." He gripped the steering wheel tighter because one thing was certain: this was no longer just about a forgotten chamber under an old station. This was about the entire town and the secrets it had been hiding in plain sight. And, if you're still with me, don't go anywhere. The next part of this story, it's where things start to get dangerous. The tin box sat on Daniel's kitchen table like a bomb. It wasn't big, maybe the size of a shoebox, but it carried the weight of something that could shatter. Livestip barely slept since bringing it home. Each time he opened the lid and saw the folded yellowed letters, his stomach tightened. The handwriting was different in each note, but every single one carried the same desperation. They all spoke of being held underground. They all spoke of people coming in the night, and they all ended with the same hopeless line: "If no one finds this, tell them I didn't run away." Rex lay on the rug nearby, his head resting on his paws, eyes following Daniel's every move. The dog's loyalty had always been absolute, but now there was something more in his gaze, a watchfulness, as if he sensed the danger in the air. Daniel knew the first step was to dig into the cases these letters hinted at, but not through official channels. Not yet. He didn't trust them to many questions were already clawing at his mind, so he went to the garage. For years he'd kept a stack of old police storage boxes there. Files that had been marked for destruction but never made it to the shredder. He told himself it was for reference, but the truth was he couldn't bring himself to throw them away. Inside was the raw history of the town. Mugshots, crime scene photos, witness statements, fingerprints, and pages of notes from long-forgotten investigations. It took hours of sifting through dust and paper before he started finding what he was looking for. Files with names that matched the letters. The first one stopped him cold. Emily Carver, reported missing in 1976, 19 years old, last seen walking home from a night shift at the diner. The official report said no signs of foul play, no leads, case closed. The second was David Weller, 15 years old, vanished on his way to school in 1981. Again, no trace, no suspects, case closed. By the time Daniel had 5 matching files laid out across his workbench, his hands were trembling. Every one of them had been marked no evidence by the lead detective at the time. Every one of them ended without answers, and every one of them had ties to the police station. He leaned back in his chair, staring at the names. These weren't random disappearances, they were connected. Rex got up and patted over, resting his chin on Daniel's knee. The quiet weight of him was grounding, but it didn't ease the gnawing thought in Daniel's head. Someone inside the station must have known someone had access to that chamber. Someone had used it. The idea made him sick. He pulled one more box from the stack, one he hadn't touched in years. Inside, buried under a mess of unfiled papers, was an old station blueprint. The date in the corner read 1948, back when the building had been first constructed. Daniel unfolded it carefully. There, in the basement section, was a room labeled no measurements, just a shaded square between 2 support walls. The chamber, it was on the official plans, but not in any of the modern versions Daniel had ever seen. Somewhere along the way, it had been erased. He spread the blueprint across the table, comparing it to the letters, dates, names, locations. They lined up in a way that was too precise to be coincidence. Rex shifted suddenly, ears twitching. A moment later, Daniel heard it tooth, a crunch of tires on gravel outside. He froze, peering through the blinds. He saw a dark sedan parked across the street. No plates on the front tinted windows. Daniel's pulse quickened. He stayed still, watching. After a minute, the car rolled slowly down the road and disappeared. It could have been nothing, or it could have been someone making sure he was home. Either way, it meant time was running out by nightfall. Daniel had packed the tin box, the letters, the files, and the blueprint into a duffel bag. If anything happened, he wanted it all together, ready to be moved, hidden, or handed to someone he could trust. There was still one thing gnawing at him: the hatch, the chamber. The feeling he'd missed something. He looked at Rex. "One more trip, boy. We go in tonight." The station was even quieter after dark, the streetlights casting long shadows across its front steps. Daniel parked 2 blocks away and approached on foot, keeping to the dark edges of buildings. Inside, the air was colder than before, as if the temperature had dropped just in this one place. The boards creaked under his weight. Every sound seemed loud. Rex moved ahead, silent but alert. When they reached the main hall, Daniel knelt and pulled back the boards again. The hatch groaned as it opened. They descended into the chamber. The beam of his flashlight swept across the walls, catching something he hadn't noticed last time: marks in the stone low to the ground. He knelt, brushing away dust. The light revealed scratches, hundreds of them. Tiny grooves etched into the stone, too small to be tools. fingernails. Daniel swallowed hard. He turned the light toward the far corner, and there, half buried in dirt, was a thin chain necklace with a small silver pendant. He lifted it carefully. On the back, engraved in delicate script, was the name Emily. His mind flashed to the first file he'd pulled that morning. Emily Carver, missing 1976. Rex barked sharply, snapping Daniel out of his thoughts. The sound echoed too loud in the enclosed space. Then Daniel heard a faint scuff of movement above, like footsteps crossing the hall again. This time they stopped directly over the hatch. Daniel killed the flashlight. The chamber plunged into darkness. His hand found Rex's collar, keeping him still. They waited for a long, breathless moment. Nothing happened. Then the footsteps retreated slowly, each creak of the boards stretching the tension tighter. When the last sound faded, Daniel let out a slow breath. They climbed back up, closing the hatch as quietly as possible. This time, Daniel didn't linger in the building. He and Rex slipped out into the night, keeping low, not speaking until they were back in the truck. He looked down at the pendant in his hand, feeling its cold weight. The walls of that chamber had seen things no one in this town wanted to admit, but Daniel wasn't going to let it stay buried. The forgotten files had given him names. The chamber had given him proof. Now all he needed was the truth about who had kept it hidden for so long. And, if you're still here, keep listening, because the next thing Rex found will make everything you've heard so far feel small. The morning after their second trip into the chamber, Daniel woke to the sound of Rex growling. It wasn't the usual low rumble he gave at the mailman. It was deep warning, and fixed toward the front door. Daniel grabbed the baseball bat from beside his couch and moved quietly to the window. Parked across the street was the same dark sedan from the day before. Only this time the driver's window was cracked open, and he could see the red tip of a cigarette glowing in the dim dawn light. They weren't even pretending to hide anymore. Daniel knew this was no random watcher. He had stirred up something that didn't like being disturbed, and now it was watching him. He tried to go about his morning routine, but his thoughts kept drifting to the files, the letters, the pendant in his jacket pocket. The duffel bag holding all of it sat near the door, packed, ready. He made a decision. If the police force couldn't be trusted, maybe there was one person who could help, someone outside official channels. Someone who had no reason to protect the station's past. Her name was Clara Jensen, a retired investigative journalist who had written a few explosive exposes in the 90s before quietly disappearing from the headlines. Daniel remembered she'd been one of the few reporters to treat Rex like more than just a dog when they worked on a big narcotics case years ago. She lived on the edge of town in a creaky house surrounded by overgrown trees. It took Daniel nearly an hour to get there. He took the long way, doubling back twice to make sure the sedan wasn't following. Clara opened the door halfway, eyes narrowing. "Cole, I thought you were done digging for ghosts." "I thought so too," Daniel said, "but I found something. And I think it's at her kitchen table." Daniel laid out the letters, the old files, the blueprint, and finally the pendant. Clara didn't speak for a long time. She read each letter twice. She traced her fingers over Emily's name. When she finally looked up, her face had lost all trace of skepticism. "I've heard whispers about a place under the station," she said quietly, "an old holding cell from before the station was officially built. But it wasn't used for arrests. Not officially anyway." Daniel leaned forward. "Then what was it for?" Clara hesitated. "That depends on who you ask. Some say it was a secret evidence room. Others say it was where certain inconvenient people disappeared." Her words sent a chill up Daniel's spine. Before they could talk further, Rex's ears shot up. A moment later, the sound of tires crunching gravel reached them. Clara crossed to the window and pulled the curtain just enough to peek outside. Her eyes went sharp. "That your friends in the sedan?" Two men were standing near a black car, one holding a camera with a telephoto lens. They weren't even subtle about it. Daniel cursed under his breath. "They followed me." Clara shook her head. "You don't have much time. If they're here, it means they know you've got something, and they're going to want it back." They moved fast. Clara dug out an old hard drive and began scanning the letters and files, snapping high-resolution photos of the pendant and blueprint. "If they take the originals, they won't erase the evidence this time," she said. The men outside stayed put. Sometimes they got in the car and with the engine running. Sometimes they paced the property line. Rex sat in the doorway watching, growl low and constant. When the scanning was done, Clara loaded everything onto two separate drives, one for Daniel, one for herself. "You keep yours hidden. I'll send mine to a contact in the city if something happens to either of us. The story goes public." It was nearly evening when Daniel left Clara's. The sedan was still there, but as soon as he turned onto the main road, it pulled out behind him. This time Daniel didn't head home. He led them through winding back roads, testing their patience, until finally he lost them in a stretch of dense forest outside town. Or so he thought. That night, Daniel couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. Every creak of the old house sounded sharper. Every shadow in the window seemed to move. He checked the locks twice around midnight. Rex growled again, this time toward the back of the house. Daniel grabbed his flashlight and moved quietly toward the kitchen. He stopped when he saw a faint silhouette outside the sliding glass door. Someone was standing just beyond the porch light's reach. "Who's there?" He barked. The figure didn't answer. They stayed perfectly still, just watching, then slowly raised one hand and pointed not at Daniel, but at Rex. Daniel's grip tightened on the bat. He yanked the blinds shut and backed away, heart pounding. By the time he dared look again, the figure was gone. The next morning the message came, not in a letter, not in a call. He found it scratched into the paint on his truck door. Stop digging, or he's on extahite. Didn't need to ask who he was. His eyes went straight to Rexta. Threat was no longer just about the past. They were coming for the one partner who had never left his side, and that was the moment Daniel made a choice. He wasn't just going to expose the truth. He was going to burn down whatever was still protecting it. If you're still here, you need to hear what happens next. Because, in the final stretch, Rex isn't the only one in danger. Daniel barely slept after finding the threat on his truck. The image of that shadowed figure pointing at Rex kept replaying in his mind each time. Sharper, darker. By morning the decision was made. He wasn't running anymore. The letters, the files, the pendant, all of it went into a weatherproof backpack. Clara's words echoed in his head. If they take the originals, they can still bury the story. But now Daniel wasn't just worried about evidence, he was worried about Rex. He called Clara. It's tonight, he said. Her voice was calm but tight. You're going back in, aren't you? I'm going to finish this. The plan was simple, at least on paper. Break into the old station before demolition crews arrived, get into the chamber one last time, and record everything. Every chain, every mark, every scrap of evidence. And then walk straight into the state investigator's office before sunrise. But when Daniel and Rex reached the station after dark, he knew they weren't alone. The glow of a flashlight moved across the cracked windows. Footsteps echoed inside, deliberate and slow. Daniel crouched low, whispering, "Stay close, buddy." They slipped in through the side entrance. The air was heavy, damp, and faintly metallic. Somewhere deep in the building, a voice muttered, followed by the scrape of something across the floorette, was coming from the chamber. Daniel moved down the hall, heart pounding, the beam of his flashlight darting over peeling paint and water stains. Rex padded silently beside him, his ears high, body tense. When they reached the main hall, Daniel froze. The hatch was open. A rope ladder dangled into the darkness below. The voices stopped then from the shadows inside the chamber. A man's voice called out, "You should have stayed retired." Daniel recognized it instantly. Chief Harrow, his old boss. The man who had signed off on more lost case files than any other officer in town. History. What's down there? Harrow, Daniel called back. A mistake that should have stayed buried. Daniel's jaw tightened. You chained kids down here. You let them disappear. Chuckle rose from the dark. You don't know the half of it, and you never will. Without warning, a figure lunged from the shadows near the stairwell. A second man, big fast. Daniel barely had time to swing the flashlight before Rex leaped forward, teeth snapping. The man screamed as Rex latched onto his arm, driving him back. Rex off, Daniel commanded, and the dog released, retreating to his side. That was enough of a distraction. Daniel darted to the hatch, switching on his camera. He climbed down fast, the smell of mildew and rust hitting him hard. The chamber was worse than he remembered. The chains glistened in the beam of his light. The carving stained states. Desperate words covered the walls, and on the far table under a dusty sheet was something new. 3 thick binders, their spines marked with years. Daniel pulled one open. Inside were photos, newspaper clippings, and handwritten notes about every missing person case from the past 30 years. Many had a single word stamped across the page. Closed even when the victim had never been found. He aimed the camera at everything, speaking into it. As he moved, "These are the records they didn't want anyone to see. This is proof." Above, footsteps thudded. Harrow's voice barked an order, and the rope ladder suddenly jerked upward. They were trapping him inside. Daniel's heart pounded. He turned, looking for another way out. Tan sawed a narrow gap in the stone wall, half hidden behind stacked crates. He shoved them aside, coughing at the cloud of dust. The gap led to an old maintenance tunnel, dark and tight. Come on, Rex. The tunnel twisted for what felt like forever, but finally they emerged into the overgrown lot behind the station. Daniel didn't waste a second. He ran for the truck, throwing the backpack inside. The camera was still rolling when he turned the ignition and tore down the road toward the state police outpost, 2 towns over. The desk sergeant's eyes widened when Daniel slapped the binders onto the counter. "I need the lead investigator," Daniel said, voice hard now. "This is about multiple missing persons, official corruption, and a chamber under the old station that's about to be demolished within minutes." He was in a small conference room, the evidence spread out before 2 state investigators. Clara arrived shortly after, carrying her own drive. They listened, they watched the footage, and when Daniel finished, one of them simply said, "We believe you." By morning, the arrests began. Chief Harrow was taken into custody before the first demolition crew arrived. Several retired officers were rounded up along with 2 local politicians. The old station was declared a crime scene. The chamber would not be buried, not this time. When the news broke, the town was in shock. People wept in the streets, some for the victims, some for the betrayal. Rex became the hero in every headline, the dog who wouldn't stop scratching until the truth came out. A week later, Daniel stood in the main hall one last time. The floorboards were gone, the hatch sealed with police tape, the building would still be demolished, but now its ghosts had names, and their stories would be told. He knelt beside Rex, scratching behind his ears. "You did good, partner, better than anyone." Rex looked up at him with those steady amber eyes, tail wagging just once as Daniel walked out into the sunlight. He felt something he hadn't in years. Peace. The station's secrets were no longer buried, the victims were no longer forgotten, and the town, though scarred, was finally free. You've been with me since the start. You know this isn't just Rex's story, it's a reminder. Sometimes the truth doesn't come from the loudest voices, but from the claws of a dog who refuses to stop digging.